Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. As always, I am Blake Smith, and with me are my partners in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt, Mr. Ryan Roberts. How are y'all tonight?
Well, apparently I'm the devil's mistress, but anyway, other than that, I'm good. Remember, always be the girlfriend, never the wife.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know which one gets the better gifts, but anyways.
Mistress.
I don't know about that. Guilt pays. Guilt pays. I'm just saying. Well, I myself have been sick. Ryan, I know you have been sick.
Yes.
So this is going to be a very interesting episode. So if we start hacking up a lung, we apologize. Can't help it. I've been in bed for like the last 4 days, literally. Not
Same.
moving.
I still got some residuals kind of sitting right in here somewhere. So
yeah, so this should be an interesting one tonight. We have, I don't know why our layout is changing. We have the funky town. We have reached last week of Ferocious Female Month, our second annual Ferocious Female Month. We love doing this during the month of May, where we bring you all these like crazy ferocious females for Mother's Day. You know, what a great way to honor our mothers. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not on board with that.
I don't know. We did it. We did it last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did it last year. AKA what?
Mean ass bitches month.
No shit. No shit for real. Now, let me tell you, this week is absolutely no different. So this week, we are going to be talking about, God, she's been called so many different things. I like to call her the Death House Landlady. We're talking about Dorothea Puente. She is absolutely one of my favorites. I've actually had this research ready to go for quite some time now. I've just been waiting for the right moment to chunk it in.
You've had it ready for about 2 months. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. So tonight, we are going to get right into it. I'm sure y'all know about Dorothea Puente.
Honestly, I don't know a whole lot about this case, but based on that trailer, Meemaw is crazy, so I can't wait to see what's going on with this whole case. So
Meemaw is crazy. You are correct on that. Well, with that, let's go ahead. Let's jump into her story real fast. So for those of our listeners and viewers who may be in the California area, the case we're talking about tonight, you might know pretty well. But for those not in the area, you may have at least heard of the name Dorothea Puente, especially if you were old enough to be able to tune into the news and pay attention in the 1980s and kind of, I guess, well, no, it's the 1980s. Yeah, sorry, I don't know where I was going with that. Or as my nieces and nephews like to call it now, the late 1900s.
Don't like that.
Screw that shit. That hurts, by the way, just so we're clear. That hurts. So Dorothea Puente, she appeared as this sweet grandmother or the lady next door. And honestly, like, you can't judge a book by its cover. And she had one hell of a fucking cover.
Yeah,
she was
for sure.
Oh yeah.
She looks like she wants to bring me cookies, but I have a feeling that ain't what's going to happen.
You can judge that book by its cover. That bitch looks mean.
She's every old lady in church that would like give you a Werther's original. Shut up.
It's true. Very true. Well, she was a convicted serial killer in California, and her story is absolutely just full of her and her ego. And the media, like I said earlier, my favorite nickname that they gave her, ended up calling her the Death House Landlady. So I got to give you a little bit of the backstory about how we get to where we are or where we end up. So Dorothea Helen Gray on January 9th of 1929 to Trudy Mae Gray and Jesse James, like that name, Gray. She was the sixth of seventh children born to the set of parents. Now, she grew up poor and was deprived of both material comforts and parental nurturing. And other reports say that she even had to scavenge for her food as well. But I wasn't able to find actual, documentation. Just a couple of sources that said that. So
now, did she grow up in the Depression, and so she kind of had to do that, or
that was a lot of what some say. Now, some said she was just neglected and mistreated.
Okay.
So I kind of took them at face value, so to speak. I didn't really delve too far into it because there was a lot of people who, yes, said the same thing, but they took it different routes of how they got there, so to speak. Okay. So now her father, an alcoholic who threatened repeatedly to take his own life in front of his children, he would end up passing from tuberculosis by the time Dorothea was 8. And her alcoholic mother, who alternated between repeatedly abusing and banding her children, she would lose custody of them in 1918, and her life ends up being taken in a motorcycle accident later on that year, before Dorothea turns 10. Okay. So by 10, she's orphaned. So her and her siblings are tossed around between foster homes, relatives' homes, things like that. And that is from court records. And she's bouncing between Napa and Los Angeles, California. Now, in some of these reports, they do write about sexual abuse in some of these orphanages or homes that she's in. But I wasn't able to corroborate any of those. Now, I will say here, you're going to hear me say some reports a lot through this. Let me give you a little bit of a definition here. I go by one rule. If I can find it documented in 3 separate places with their documentation cited, I'm going to call it as fact. However, there are times, like I've just previously been saying, where I say some sources or some reports. This is basically, I found it in 3 separate locations, but I wasn't able to find any citation or documentation for it.
Okay.
So just take it for what it is at that point. So we're going to jump in her story quite a bit because there's not a whole lot about her childhood that is known. We're going to get to her at age 16. She has now decided at this point she's going to make it on her own. And she drifts up to Olympia, Washington, where she ends up working as a prostitute to make money. Now, it's during this time she catches the eye of a 22-year-old soldier named Fred McFall. And he is attracted to her comely and flaxen hair and her soft blue eyes and charming smile. And he had just returned from the Pacific after World War II. So he snatches her up. He marries her in 1945. She ends up giving birth to her first daughter in 1946, followed closely by a second one less than a year later. Now, however, neither her maternal instinct nor her marital bliss ever came, and public records actually show that she more than likely inherited her mother's aversion to child rearing. Oh. One girl ends up being placed with relatives, and the other one was put up for adoption. Why they both didn't go one way or the other, I wasn't able to find. So there's some reports during this that she says that she had suffered a miscarriage in between this time. And in an interview with Martin Hughes for Sacktown magazine, this is in 2009, she also tells him that she had twin daughters who ended up taking their own life as young adults 1 week apart. Now, she is pressed on this in that interview, and she declines to say anything about like the father's name, when and where they were born and died, and the circumstances surrounding their death. Is
she known to be a pathological liar?
Oh, you're going to find that out very, 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 very quickly. Okay. So, yeah, setting the scene for you, Ryan. There you go. Okay. So with all of that happening, Fred McFall and Dorothea, they split in 1948. Now, later that same year, Dorothea, she moves down to San Bernardino, California. And this is where she's hit with her first criminal act, and she's arrested for attempting to float a check under a false name while purchasing women's accessories. So, ladies, that bra and thong set from Victoria's Secret, not worth it, girl.
Boy, I tell you what, I'd like to purchase some women's accessories.
What the hell, Ryan?
I don't know.
Jesus Christ. So she pleads guilty to 2 counts of forgery. She ends up serving 4 months in jail, and shortly after her release, she fled San Bernardino, despite the terms of her probation, which essentially said, don't do that. Now, one of the many sordid stories that she does recount about her life at this time was given to Martin Hughes for the Sacktown magazine article, and he retells that story as Dorothea saying that while she's in San Francisco, she's now fled San Bernardino, she's in this department store called the Emporium. She's 19 years old. She feels a tap on her shoulder, and a man identifying himself as a talent scout for the Radio City Rockettes, yes, the famed dance troupe, sized her up on the spot, invited her to fly east for an audition. Now, despite lacking any formal training whatsoever, she is actually quoted as saying, quote, "I went out there, they hired me. So after that, I was out in New York on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then I'd come back to California the rest of the week," end quote. Now she's, yeah, exactly.
I don't know about all that.
Let's set this stage a little more for you, Ryan. So at this time, she's going by Dorothea McFall. Obviously the last name of her recent ex-husband. But she performs on stage, quote unquote, as Sharon Niarda. No, I don't ask me where the name come from. No idea. Ain't got a clue. So
well,
she
McFall probably isn't a good name for a dancer.
Probably not. You're probably right. Well, and that's quick foreshadowing. Just leave it at that. That's a real quick foreshadow from Shelley right there. So she states that she balanced her dance career with a second job as a cook at a San Francisco seafood restaurant, shuttling between the coasts until her dance career came to a sudden end in 1957. 9 years later, 9 years she's with the the Rockettes. She says, quote, I was on the stage when the girl next to me broke her heel and bumped into me. We both fell into the orchestra pit and I broke my leg. She, the other girl, was paralyzed. End quote.
Okay. Rewind a little bit.
Okay.
This bitch is into Rockettes, and she's having to work at seafood restaurants back and forth on the weekends. Okay, come on now.
Yep. Yeah.
Who she thinks she fooling?
Yeah.
With
Well,
no
as
dance training.
with no dance
Yeah.
training,
She
no
was
formal
hired
dance
on the
training.
spot
Yeah,
with
on
no
the spot.
audition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, as you guessed it, as Mr. Investigative Reporter Martin Hughes and myself as well, we both kind of looked into this stuff. Now, the Rockettes Alumni Association, they have no record of someone either named Sharon Niarda or Dorothea McFall performing with the company, nor of two dancers falling into the orchestra pit. Go figure.
Yeah.
However, she carries on her story with Mark Hughes telling her that as a Rockette, she met John F. Kennedy, then a U.S. Senator, his wife Jackie, and befriended Rita Hayworth.
Oh, okay.
And these names were basically belong to a litany of famous names that Dorothea dropped during this whole interview. So
Yeah, I ate lunch with Robert Downey Jr. on Tuesdays too. So
do you? Can you get an autograph? I'd really like
I
that.
told
you
him
know,
you
I'll
weren't going to
ask
talk
him.
about that.
I'll ask him. You know, he's kind of funny about that sort of thing, but we'll see what I can do.
Yeah. Well, she says that these luminaries, according to her in the Sacktown article, was her connection in her years in Sacramento with her second husband, Axel Johansson. So by the time that we get to 1952, we find her remarried to this guy. He's a merchant seaman. His name is Axel Bryn Johansson. She had met him in San Francisco, and they moved to Sacramento a short time after they were wed, and they lived in the city on and off over the next decade. Now, according to her, Axel was the brother of Ingemar Johansson, referring to the heavyweight boxing champion.
Oh,
Now,
God.
I'm going to tell you right now, a very quick Google search for Ingemar Johansson pulls up his Find a Grave profile where his only brothers' names are Rolf and Henry.
Not
So-
Axel. No Axel.
Not
anywhere
Axel.
in there?
No Axel
You
anywhere in
sure?
there. I
'Cause she
looked.
said Axel
Yes.
was in there.
Oh, yes. No, I looked. Axel was not in there.
Either this woman is 100% bullshit, or she is Forrest Gump. Like, this woman.
True.
Come
True.
on now.
So back to their marriage, Dorothea and Axel Johansson's. And again, shocker, marital bliss did not take root.
Mhm.
Dorothea had this appetite for drinking, gambling, other men,
Mhm.
and frequent quarrels and separations marred the marriage basically from the beginning, so to speak. So
Yeah, most husbands don't like you doing that.
yeah, most. Well, she would take advantage of his out of town like seafaring adventures. She would spend time at home in the company of these other men and would gamble away all his money while he was out to sea. So now according,
Well, I mean,
Go
they
ahead.
can call his boxer brother for more money if they need it, you know. So
I guess they could. Yeah. Now, according to court files, Axel Johansson, he actually has Dorothea committed to a psychiatric ward in 1961,
you don't say.
where they actually placed her on antipsychotics. Now, what got her there, you wondering? Oh, perfect. I got the story for you. So, previous to her hospitalization, police had busted her, Dorothea, in a raid in a house of ill fame
Okay.
on Fulton Avenue in Sacramento. Sorry. The house had fronted as a bookkeeping service, according to these court records. And an undercover officer walked in posing as a trucker. And only after Dorothea offered to perform fellatio on him, she was arrested and the front was busted. And her explanation was, quote, I was there visiting a friend when the cops came in. I think I've used that excuse as well.
Wait, and so she was just so compelled she offered to do that? So like, I'm here with my buddy, but you know what? Let's run over here real quick. What do you say?
Yeah.
$20?
Yeah. So she ends up serving 90 days in the county jail, being arrested for prostitution as well as a madam. How are you just visiting a friend if you're the madam?
Oh.
Well, the people that work for her were friends.
Yeah, there you go.
I guess so. Yeah, true.
Prove they're not.
Yeah, true. So he has her hospitalized or institutionalized, I guess we could say. And by 1966, he divorces her. And she didn't waste a whole lot of time with a lot of stuff. So she ends up taking on this identity named Sharon Johansson, which ends up hiding her delinquent behavior, if you will, by portraying herself as a very devout Christian woman. She establishes her reputation at this time as a caregiver, providing young women with sanctuary from poverty and abuse without any charge whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And by 1968, at the age of 39, she's already remarried to her third husband, who is 16 years her junior. And I will just say at this point in her lifetime, hasn't been physically kind to Dorothea.
Mm-hmm.
Hard living, being a madam, taking its
Oh,
toll on her looks and her weight. We'll just put it that way. And her third husband, Roberto Puente, he was a Mexican immigrant. He was only interested in one thing, and it wasn't how his wife looked. All he cared about was money and American citizenship. That was it. So in 1969, these two separate, with Dorothea claiming a domestic abuse. She had actually tried to, and this is how quick she moved. Her and Axel divorced in 1966. She actually tried to serve Roberto Puente, with divorce papers in 1967.
Damn.
So she flies through marriages. However, he ends up fleeing to Mexico. Their divorce is actually not finalized until 1973.
Whoa.
So they're separated, but they're together, married for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
And they continued having this very turbulent relationship. She ends up filing a restraining order against him in 1975, but she continued to use his last name, Puente. So not long after their separation, Dorothea, who had briefly by this point run an unauthorized rehab program for alcoholics, ends up opening a boarding house at 2100 F Street in Sacramento. Now, this is not the boarding house that we know later on. This is a different one. Go ahead, Ryan.
This woman reinvents her time. She has reinvented herself more times than Madonna at this point. This woman is insane.
She's the damn chameleon at this point, I guess.
Right?
And this venture that she takes on with this boarding house, I mean, it is thriving from the start. So what she ends up doing is bringing in these tenants, if you will. She has room for up to 24 tenants. Mm-hmm. She begins to cultivate this very strong rapport with social workers for her willingness to accept alcoholics, drug addicts, other very difficult clients and tenants into her home. She establishes herself as a very genuine resource for the community to aid the alcoholics, the homeless, and the mentally ill by holding Alcoholics Anonymous meetings at her home. Mm-hmm. So all of this business that she was kind of running through this helped supply her with a steady stream of revenue at this point. Now, she took this revenue. Now, I'm not going to lie. This is where she got smart. She took this revenue and this success, and she gained even more success by pumping the money into political campaigns and charitable causes, which brought her this appearance of legitimacy and access to very elite circles. So at this time, while doing all this, she was able to reach out to the Hispanic community in Sacramento and establish herself as a respected member of that. Now, fact is, she's born in Redlands, California. Mm-hmm. However, she's able to speak passable Spanish, and with that and the Puente last name, she claimed Mexico as her birthplace. Okay. Words are hard. And of course, like I said, that facade's easily maintained with the Puente last name. So she ends up donating to Hispanic arts and education programs while providing cheap medical care to her boarders and other patients, quote unquote, by falsely claiming to have worked as a nurse in World War II. Now, her war story, because she has one. I mean, God, come on. Dorothea Puente. Anyways, her war story was that she survived the 1942 Bataan Death March, in which roughly 75,000 American and Filipino prisoners of war were marched 65 miles, many dying along the way. She was 13 when that happened.
This woman.
Just to let you know. So
I swear.
Now, despite this, her goodwill earned her flattering write-ups in local Spanish publications and earned her the title La Doctora. Now, Donald Dorfman, who's a longtime Sacramento criminal attorney, stated, quote, she was a respected figure of the Mexican community. She gave them clothing. She gave them food. She gave advice to all these young Mexican women who came to her when they were trying to get divorced. Mm-hmm. In between all of this, as if she doesn't have enough going on, she meets and marries her fourth husband. His name is Pedro Angel Montalvo. And this is extremely short-lived because he leaves her a week later in 1976, probably because he was scared shitless of this woman. Who knows? I have no idea. But
she's crazy as hell. I got to go.
Okay. So her upstanding reputation she had built was hiding this more nefarious character, as we know. She was starting to forge the signatures of her tenants on their benefits checks before signing them over to herself, and she concealed that very well for a very long time. However, she eventually gets arrested for this scam in 1978, cashing 34 state and federal checks. She was ordered to pay $4,000 in restitution, and she also received 5 years federal probation, in which the terms stated she was not allowed to work with the elderly, handle people's government checks, nor run a boarding house. So she adapted, as most of these subjects in these stories do. And over the next couple of years, she decided, you know what? I'm going to become an in-home caregiver, and decided to take her crimes up a notch. So she began to perfect this matronly image by wearing vintage clothing, large oversized granny glasses, letting her hair turn gray, and using a very softer, tremulous voice. She inflated her age by 10 to 15 years to thwart any suspicion and disarm her elderly clients while under the guise of administering them. So I'm sure you're wondering how she's getting away with this. Okay, obviously. But you got to remember that back then, there weren't any of the systems we have in place now to be able to check out individuals' backgrounds for these like red flags and whether they're on probation or not, honestly. So she also begins carrying around a medical bag at this time that included a stethoscope and a blood pressure cuff.
Suddenly her ass is a doctor now.
Yeah.
You know
But
what?
she was not a doctor nor a nurse. These were just merely props to make her look like a practitioner.
It was a lot more fun back then. You could just walk out of your house one day and say, you know what? I'm a brain surgeon. And just start carrying around a bag and passing yourself off as a brain surgeon.
I mean,
You
Yeah.
can be anything you want.
true.
I mean, it's a lot harder today to do that.
Well, I actually found an interview with a retired social worker that knew her around this time, named Mildred Ballinger.
Mm-hmm.
She had met Dorothea in the late 1970s, just as she was beginning this, like, to run this new scheme about being this in-home caregiver. She stated that Dorothea Puente displayed an odd obsession in her own health, telling her clients and coworkers that she had suffered from cancer. But she said that every time that you gone over to meet with her or see her, her cancer had moved. It was in her brain, her breast, her liver. You know, it was always going somewhere else. So you knew that she was lying.
I know somebody like that.
Well, Ballinger actually began to suspect Dorothea of Shelley. He's looking at you. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, Shelly not the one getting on here saying I'm sick. Shelly good.
I'm just kidding. So Mildred Ballinger, she actually began to suspect Dorothea of more nefarious acts during this point in time. So she learned this by two elderly women that were in Dorothea's care had suffered recurring spells of illness that completely baffled the doctors. Now, tests conducted on these two ladies revealed high levels of unprescribed drugs in their systems, and one of the women even claimed that checks and jewelry were also missing from her home. So Ballinger begins to urge her fellow coworkers, stay away from Dorothea. Don't go there. But at this time, due to lack of housing for addicts and alcoholics and the mentally ill, either Ballinger's coworkers just flat out ignored her, or were just completely unaware that Dorothea was an ex-con running a boarding house, and they continued to send their clients over to her.
And she was cheap for them to come and live with her. It was cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So where things ratchet up yet again is in late 1981. Dorothea Puente, she is a part-time cook at the Flame Club in Sacramento, and she meets 61-year-old Ruth Monroe. Now, Ruth was married to Harold, who was he was a gentleman that was either a friend or an acquaintance of Dorothea's through the Flame Club. That's how she meets Ruth, is through her husband Harold. So Dorothea had been talking about opening up this restaurant at this time, and Ruth had a little bit of money from working at the Timco pharmacy, and the two became very fast friends. And soon Dorothea was meeting Ruth's family, in which Ruth's son, Bill Clausen, recalls that shortly after meeting her, he was like, Dorothea looked at me and said, "Call me grandma."
I don't know you.
No thanks. No thanks. We good.
Thank you. You're the scary lady. No, thank you.
Not with the way you look, bitch.
No.
So Dorothea and Ruth, they end up opening this restaurant together. And at first, the business was good, and it was called the Round Corner Tavern. The business was good, but then it began to flounder a little bit, in which, according to Ruth's son, again, Bill, Dorothea would urge Ruth that they needed to put more and more money into the business because it was floundering, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unfortunately, fate had a different plan when Ruth's husband, Harold, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer in the spring of 1982, and he ended up succumbing to the disease. So, not wanting to live alone, Ruth decided, along with her family, her son and all them, that the best choice would be to move in with Dorothea as a roommate to help save money. And in April of 1982, that's exactly what happened. Now, Ruth's son, Bill, he would stop by and see his mother. I mean, she had just lost her husband. He would see her every single day. And everything was going great until about 2 weeks after moving in. And within 2 weeks' time, Ruth's health began to deteriorate. So Bill stopped by one day, and instead of his mother there, he saw this pallid, enfeebled woman that was now Ruth. And he noted that she had an alcoholic drink in her hand, and he said he found this odd because alcohol bothered her, like she was allergic to it, bothered her.
Mm-hmm.
So when he asked her about it, she said that Dorothea had fixed the beverage, red flag number one, had fixed the beverage for her to help calm her nerves because the restaurant had just closed down. They didn't have any more money to put into it. So when he asked what it was, she's like, oh, it's creme de menthe. And he said that seemed odd as well, but Dorothea had told the family she was a nurse and they thought that she knew best. So he didn't really question anything and he left.
Yeah, nobody's drinking straight creme de menthe. That's
No.
And I don't know many nurses that go, yeah, have a drink. You'll feel a hell of a lot better.
Yeah. Have a beverage. It'll all be good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he ends up stopping by the next day and he sees Dorothea sitting at the table and he asks where his mother's at. And Dorothea tells him, quote, well, she's sleeping. She's not feeling well. Well, he starts to trek up the stairs or down the hall. I don't know exactly where her room was. And he's going to go see her. And Dorothea replies with, no, don't go in there. Just let her rest. And love this guy. His reply turns to her and looks at her and says, I'm not leaving until I see my mom.
Yeah.
So he heads back to her room. Now, when he enters the room, he saw his now bedridden, feeble mother who's unable to speak. So he sits on the edge of the bed and he placed a hand on her. Now, Ruth never said anything, but according to Bill, he said his mother's eyes were filled with tears. And he tells his mother not to worry, she'll be okay, and that Dorothea is going to take care of her. And he kissed her on the cheek, told her he'd see her the next day, and he left. And that actually never happened because at 6 a.m. the following morning, Bill received a phone call from his sister saying that Dorothea had called her and told her that their mother had just passed. Dorothea also told her that she went ahead and called the coroner to come collect the body and told the coroner that Ruth had become severely depressed over the loss of her husband and committed suicide by overdose in her room.
Mm.
Now, when toxicology reports came back, they revealed toxic levels of acetaminophen and codeine, so this corroborated Dorothea's claim of an overdose. And this is the part, this makes my skin crawl. It pisses me off. Now, Dorothea told Bill's sister that the siblings needed to come get their mother's stuff, but she also said that their mother had given her everything, jewelry, cash, all of it, everything. And all she was able to give the siblings was a fucking empty purse.
What?
That was it.
What a monster.
Oh, yeah. That part pisses me off. So this
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And if anybody wants to know about the empty purse, the kids didn't even get her clothes.
Mm-mm.
Nothing.
Because she enjoyed taking clothes to sell them and to donate them to look like a good person. I'm going to donate all these clothes to you.
Yep.
Yeah, if she wasn't selling them, then she was donating them in her own name, saying, I have these for you, trying to gain community favor.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So this rapid decline of Ruth's health perplexed her family. Bill and his sister, they didn't believe that their mother had taken her own life. I mean, this theory was absolutely hardened into subjective truth when they discovered that following the funeral, Dorothea had drained thousands of dollars belonging to Ruth from a joint business account.
Oh, you don't say.
Yeah. So the siblings went to go see District Attorney Bill Wood. And he actually said that he was shocked. I mean, she had basically drained the account and then she killed Ruth Monroe. That was his words. That was what he thought back then. But unfortunately, it was his last day in office, and he turns the case over to the Major Crimes Unit. Now, at this time in 1982, they had no way of telling how Ruth had gotten the toxic levels of drugs in her system. So again, her taking her own life, that determination was upheld.
Mm-hmm.
Well, several weeks later, a 74-year-old man, Malcolm McKenzie, comes forward claiming that Dorothea had actually drugged him and stolen from him. He said the two had been to drinks together while they had found themselves immersed in this conversation, in which he mentioned he didn't live far from the bar and he invited Dorothea back to his place. And when they returned Malcolm's apartment, he said he began to feel very strange, and he laid down, and at that point, couldn't move. So Malcolm said that he was paralyzed, essentially, but he was able to keep an eye and watch what Dorothea was doing in his apartment. And he watched her go through his belongings. She took checks, cash, coins, and even coming up to him and slipping a ring off of his pinky before turning around and leaving his apartment.
Oh, yeah, she roofied his ass.
Oh, yeah. So he realized in that moment he had been administered some type of stupefying agent, and he waited for the effects to wear off. And once he was able to regain more motion, several hours later, he reports the incident to the police. Now, this incident, along with several others that were reported to the police, Dorothea ends up getting arrested and indicted on 5 felony charges. It was 74-year-old. Yeah, that's updated version of her. 74-year-old Malcolm McKenzie, along with 4 other elderly individuals, said Dorothea had drugged them as their caregivers, stolen cash, checks, jewelry from them. Dorothea then took the checks, signed them over to herself, and deposited them into her bank account. Now, she ends up pleading guilty to all 5 charges and was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Well, with this write-up in the local newspaper about this, Bill and his sister went to the district attorney's office again to claim that Ruth had, in fact, murdered their mother. That's what they're trying to get proven. Well, the crime lab in Sacramento was not set up to test for certain things in 1982, so there was still no way to determine that Ruth Monroe had not taken her own life. So again, that determination was upheld. So we're up to like 3 times now with that already. Well, when Martin Hughes with the Sacktown Magazine article, he pressed Dorothea about these crimes. She is quoted as saying, quote, "Those cases were lies. I didn't drug anyone. I'm not that kind of person," end quote.
What kind of person are you then?
He says that she says this while averting her eyes all around the room too. So, yeah.
Me? No.
Me?
Not me. I wouldn't do such a thing.
So she ends up only serving 3 out of the 5 years, gaining 2 years credit for good behavior. And when she got out, she ends up, stepping things up a notch. Because why not?
Gotta make up for lost time.
Yeah, I guess so.
She just don't quit.
No. So while she was in prison and prior to her release, a state psychologist who evaluated her diagnosed her as schizophrenic, stating, quote, "This woman is a disturbed woman who does not appear to have remorse or regret for what she has done. She is to be considered dangerous, and her living environment and or employment should be closely monitored," end quote. Well, while in prison, Dorothea struck up a pen pal relationship with 77-year-old retiree from Oregon, Everson Gilmuth. And when Dorothea was released from prison in 1985, Gilmuth was waiting for her outside the prison to pick her up in his red 1980 Ford pickup, red. So the couple's relationship quickly developed, and they were soon opening up joint bank accounts, making wedding plans for what would be Dorothea's 5th marriage. But you guessed it, marital bliss, again, did not happen, and soon after her release, Everson Gilmuth just disappeared. And Dorothea ended up writing a note to his family stating the following in one of the letters, quote, "Everson and I got married early December. We are quite happy. We will stay here with his longtime friend until December 29th, then go to my family in Tulsa. I have three grown children. Hope this finds you well. Everson will write after we get settled. Signed, Irene." So it seemed that Dorothea wasted no time into getting back to like some scammy ways.
Yeah.
So wait a minute. So now she only got 3 children because she had one that we know went to a family member, one that got adopted out, then had a pair of twins that allegedly killed. Where the hell are we getting 3? So either we one kid off either way.
This lady ain't never been to Tulsa a day in her life, I don't believe, number one.
Not that I could ever find.
Was that
was that her new
the
alias?
choice of Irene? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Irene did.
I guess she just picked whatever just came to mind, so to speak.
Okay.
So, yeah. So just prior to this letter going out in November of 1985, Dorothea had hired a handyman named Ishmael Flores to install some paneling in the new boarding home at 1426 F Street, which could host up to 8 tenants. Now, this is the house that we know. Now, this house went against her newly extended federal probation due to her recent stint in prison, which again stated, cannot run a boarding house, handle government checks for others, or work directly with the elderly. But for Flores's labor, Dorothea decided to pay him $800 and gave him a bonus as well as an odd request. She requested Flores to come back and build her a 6-foot long by 3-foot wide and 2-foot deep wooden box. And for his added trouble, his bonus included a red 1980 Ford pickup truck that her boyfriend in Las Vegas no longer wanted. Well, Dorothea said she needed to move some books. This is actual footage from the of the box. Well, not footage, but a screenshot of the footage. She needed to move some books and things to a storage facility up north and wanted to transport them in the box. So Flores followed through with this request, not thinking anything. Well, when he returned the next day after finishing the box, he found the lid nailed shut, and Dorothea asked him to help her load it up so they could drive it to the storage facility, and Flores obliged. Well, along the way, Dorothea seemed to have a change of heart. She told Flores to stop while they were on the Garden Highway in Sutter County so they could just dump the box and its contents near or in the river below. And again, Flores obliged.
Does he not? Are the alarm bells not going off in his head at this point? Because no,
well, at
I'm
the
not.
very least, it's littering.
Yeah, I'm not helping somebody fucking just dump a box that's mysteriously nailed shut that is
and shaped like a coffin.
Yes. I don't know.
I'd help one of the two of y'all, but we'd never speak of it.
I mean, I don't care if this lady, this lady is a sweet little old granny, supposedly looking like it. No, there's no fucking way. He's got to think something's up at this point.
Maybe he's worried about his own self and thinking, I don't know what this old bat's doing, but I'm going to help her do this and I'm going to get the hell out of this mess.
So, you can just drop me off right here. Bye-bye. What?
All right, my mic muted. Sorry.
You
my
miming?
bad. Sorry. Yeah, I'm miming now. Well, he ends up following through with it. And the two end up dumping the box and they go back to Dorothea's boarding house. And Dorothea decides, hey, I'm going to write Everson's family a note saying that he's too sick to write and he would get in touch with them later.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the note was that I read y'all, that she signed Irene. Well, on New Year's Day in 1986, a fisherman and his son noticed the macabre-shaped box and reported the mysterious box to the police. Well, when the police came out to investigate, they opened the box to find the badly decomposed remains of what they only could tell was an elderly gentleman or an elderly individual.
That's something that is kind of weird to me too. Like, would the box not smell? Because I don't think she's embalmed him. She doesn't have embalming equipment that I know about anyway.
Not that I know about, no.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm just curious.
Well, it had definitely seemed that she had kicked things up a notch, but the elderly gentleman's remains wouldn't be identified for another 3 years. And in the meantime, Everson Gilman's benefit checks never stopped, so Dorothea continued to cash those as well. Well, Dorothea went back to start up this new thriving boarding house. And you got to remember that there was a lot of mechanisms in place at this time to attempt to catch people like Dorothea and what she was doing in terms of the boarding house with her probation. And every so often, individuals will come in and inspect her boarding house. But keep in mind, she'd been married 4 times. She'd been married 4 times at this point. So the names that she went by at various times during this period of her life were Dorothea McFall, Dorothea Johansson, Dorothea Montalvo, and Dorothea Puente. So law enforcement at times sometimes didn't even realize exactly who they were talking to or what somebody had on their record, and record keeping is not what it is today, obviously. Plus, she knew all these magical words to say to government officials or the people working for the social services. So she was able to kind of get around them. Well, she goes back to accepting these tough cases, or as they've been referred to in her case, the shadow people, those who are marginally homeless without friends or families that would call a checkup on them. And over the next 2.5 years, she would take in a total of 40 tenants. Now, during this period, parole agents visited with Dorothea at least 15 times, according to records, but because of her persuasiveness and being able to pass those tenants off as guests or friends, no violations were ever noted. And some of the tenants began to disappear, but because of their transient lifestyles, nothing was ever noted about it. And Dorothea considered herself to be an able caretaker and boasted about her accomplishments. Scattered around this new boarding house were photos of her with the likes of California governors George Dukeiman and Jerry Brown, whom she danced with at a fundraising ball. And in that same interview with Martin Hughes, she claims that she had spent time in the 70s with California governors Pat Brown and Ronald Reagan as well. And she recalls the first president's wife, Jane Wyman, as, quote, good friends. However, when the second wife, Nancy, is brought up, she says, quote, me and Nancy, we never got along. Just to let you know, she was like 20 years old living in the Bay Area when all this took place.
Yeah,
so
I was
again,
gonna say, I think at that point Jane Wyman had already passed away. So yeah, you can't go ask her, right?
Yeah. Well, so she began taking in all these people. She also fed the community around her house as well. She'd have burrito day. So she's giving free food to the community as well. And when somebody moved in, she lived upstairs. They lived downstairs. She would collect their monthly mail before they ever saw it, paid them stipends, and pocketing the rest for expenses, which were the food, the room, the board, all that kind of stuff. And she would do that by signing it over herself. Essentially, she got a revenue of about $5,000 a month from this. Now, suspicion was first aroused when her neighbors noticed the odd activities of a homeless alcoholic known only as Chief, who Dorothea stated she had adopted and hired as her handyman. Now, she would have Chief dig in the basement, cart soil and rubbish away in a wheelbarrow, and he later dismantled the garage in the back, installed a fresh concrete slab, and allegedly, shortly after that, Chief disappeared. And there's not really another mention of him in any stories or reports that I've read. So it's about 2.5 years that she's running this, building this back up. And nobody, all against her probation, nobody was keeping an eye on her until 1988. Around early 1988, an outreach counselor with Volunteers of America named Judy Moyes became concerned that she hadn't heard from one of her clients, Bert Montoya. And with Montoya's history of being a transient, his disappearance would have gone unnoticed had it not been for this woman that's on the screen, her persistence, Judy Moyes. It had been about 3 months since she had last heard from Montoya. Now, Judy Moyes had visited Dorothea prior to placing Montoya under Dorothea's care in her home. And she states at the time, County Mental Health had created this homeless task force, and Volunteers of America was part of that task force. And what their goal was to get people off the street and get them, help with housing and mental health and all that kind of stuff. She also has a son who has mental health issues. So she noticed Bert Montoya right away. And she said that people knew that there happened to be a place that was so well recommended, so very well recommended, by saying that there was this wonderful woman there and she really takes good care of her clients. So she goes to check it out. Now, while she's there, she's probing around the place, asking questions and everything like that. And she says that Dorothea is super sweet, but she meets another tenant, John Sharp. Now, John Sharp told her that there was a lot of pluses to living with Dorothea, and Judy was thoroughly impressed with the home. And she ends up placing Bert with Dorothea around February of 1988, and he really kind of seemed to thrive at that point. Now, Bert Montoya, his birth name was Alvaro Gonzalez Montoya, and many reports have described him as a, quote, gentle bear of a man. And that's him on the screen. Now, according to Judy, Bert had come over with his family when he was 16 to the southern states, and it was at this time that he began to exhibit signs of schizophrenia. His parents tried to help him and put him in mental institution, and it's in this institution where Bert unfortunately received a lot of shock therapy. So when he got out, he left home without telling his family because he'd become estranged from them at that point, and he somehow wound up in Sacramento. But he continued to struggle with mental health issues and homelessness for years to come. And Judy wanted to keep tabs on Bert, so she called Dorothea to check in on him from time to time. Now, according to Judy, after a few months, Dorothea told her that Bert wasn't there at the moment whenever she called. And Dorothea said Bert was in Mexico with his brother, that there had been a fiesta, as she had put it, and he'd be back on Friday. Well, that didn't sit right or add up with Judy. She knew that Bert didn't have any contact with his family. So she called back on Friday to speak with Bert, to which she was told by Dorothea that Bert wasn't there and that he'd be back next week and not to worry about it. Judy tells Dorothea, no, actually, what I'm going to do is come Monday, if I hadn't heard from Bert, I'm going to be calling the police and report him missing. Well, Monday rolls around, and Judy said the moment that she got into her office, she immediately received a phone call The call was from a gentleman who named himself as Don Anthony and said that Bert was no longer living at the house. He stated that Bert's brother had come from Mexico with his family and they come by and picked him up. And Judy didn't buy it one bit.
Mm-hmm.
And Judy knew where she could find one of the tenants. She had, the previously named John Sharp. And when she finally tracked him down and found John Sharp, she asked him, "Did you go to Mexico?" And he goes, "No, none of us went to Mexico. None." And she says, "So," she changed tactics and said, "So tell me about where you live. Like, is something wrong?" And she said there was a very long pause, to which John said, "Yeah, there's something wrong here. She's been digging a lot of holes."
Oh.
And so, alarmed, Judy immediately filed a missing person report for Bert. And that was on November the 7th, 1988. She said, quote, "I went to file a missing person report, but I really feared that there's other things going on in the house that John Sharp talked to me about." So a police officer is dispatched to the house at 1426 F Street. If y'all want to know the address, it's on Google too. And when the officers arrived, they spoke to Dorothea and questioned her about Bert's whereabouts, to which Dorothea replied that he had gone to Mexico with his brother, and then his family had picked him up, and Bert had moved to Utah. Now, alongside, I'm telling you, these stories, man.
I mean, they just keep building on top of each other.
I know.
Yeah.
Building. The lies get deeper and deeper.
Yeah,
More
he's been
intricate.
fiestaing, a little extra fiesta and going on, and then he goes to Mexico and, hey, I think I'll go to Utah now. What?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't really seem like kind of a logical progression of places to go.
No.
So.
Well, alongside Dorothea, whenever this police officer came over, was another tenant present, none other than John Sharp. And John Sharp corroborated Dorothea's story about Bert going on a vacation and then moving. But somewhere in the midst of all these conversations, Sharp was actually able to slip a note to the responding officer that was there. And once he was able to take a glance at it outside of Dorothea's view, the responding officer read the note, and it simply said, quote, "She wants me to lie to you." So he's brought in for questioning and interview, and he says, this is the quote he gave in his interview. He says, quote, "She said, 'John, I'm going to ask you to lie for me today.' She said, 'I think I'm going to jail.' She said, 'The police are coming out.' And she said, 'I want you to tell them that I was gone Thursday and Friday and that you saw Bert on Saturday.' Then she said, 'I'll make it worth your while.'" So when pressed about later on in the conversation, he talks about it smelling something. But when pressed about the smell that John Sharp had come across in the home, he stated it smelled like death. And the officer interviewing him says, "Well, how do you know the smell?" He says, "Well, I worked for the Kansas City Mortuary Service, so I know that smell. And it's coming off that room off the kitchen, and you can't smell it in any other place."
Mm.
So he didn't actually know what had happened to Bert, but what he knew was that what Dorothea was telling him wasn't true.
Yeah.
He also recalled a recent experience with another tenant in the house, 55-year-old Benjamin Fink, who was a longtime alcoholic and bender. John Sharp remembered Dorothea, quote unquote, caring for Benjamin Fink. And the last that John saw of Benjamin was when Dorothea had gone to his room to, quote, "make him feel better." And it was after this that Benjamin Fink vanished. And that's when soon after the acrid stench of rotting flesh spread through the home and beyond. And it even caused some of the neighbors to complain about the smell. But she blamed it on sewer problems. So, but still, all of this did not sit right with John Sharp. He knew that something was up.
Mm-hmm.
So he corroborated the fact that she had hired prisoners to work, for her, probably referencing the story of Chief from earlier, to dig and fill large holes in the backyard, and that some of the holes were covered with concrete. So with all this information, the police knew they had to do something. Bert fit Dorothea's key victims, who were more than likely never to be reported missing. I mean, that's the biggest thing. So Detective John Cabrera comes onto the case. He's assigned to the case at this point. He says that he started to immediately look into who Dorothea was and found out that she was on federal parole rather quickly. That's another part that pisses me off. But anyways, somebody would have just looked. And Detective Cabrera sees Dorothea had been incarcerated for using knockout drops to drug people and take their money in Social Security checks. And he said, quote, "It was evident that I needed to get into her house and talk to her, and I needed to find out what happened to Bert," end quote. And all the while, Judy Moyes was calling persistently, telling and begging Detective Cabrera to take shovels with them based on her talk with John Sharp.
Mm-hmm.
So 4 days later, after she files the missing person report on November 11th, 1988, Detective Cabrera, along with his partner and Dorothea Puente's federal parole agent, they all go to Dorothea's house, shovels in hand. And they first spoke with a very calm and poised Dorothea, who told them she was expecting them. And they questioned her about Bert. Now, she stuck to her story that Bert had left for Utah after a trip to Mexico. She said the one thing she knew is that Bert was gone with a relative, and she was at church the time that Bert left. Whatever. But anyway.
How convenient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fucking bitch. Well, Detective Cabrera pushed harder, knowing that Dorothea was on parole, and he very pointedly asked her, quote, "What exactly is it here at this place that you are running?" And there was a pause, and he says, "I'll never forget her answer." He says she turned to her parole officer, and all she said was, "Jim, I'm in violation of my parole." And that shocked the three of them, honestly, that she was so just forthcoming with that.
Just candid about it.
Yeah, she just said, "I'm in violation of my parole." Well, of course, immediately they asked, "Hey, can we search your house?" And they did. So as the men went through the house, they noticed nothing really amiss. Everything in its place, very, very tidy, except that while Detective Cabrera was looking around the house, under beds, closets, all this stuff, he kept finding these little blue pills, capsules. And he said that he knew people with sleeping disorders took these pills. And it's in that moment that Detective Cabrera said that things began to really congeal together for him. Unfortunately, though, not finding sufficient evidence, the men began to leave when at last Detective Cabrera turned to Dorothea and said, quote, "Oh, Dorothea, one more thing. Would you give us permission to dig in your yard?" And he said Dorothea looked at him puzzled and asked, "Whatever for?" "Well, whatever for?" And he says, "Well, that social worker, Judy Moyes, I just want to be able to tell her that we searched everywhere and we dug around and we found nothing." So with that, she kind of haphazardly was like, "Okay, whatever. Yeah, you can." And hands them an extra shovel, adding to the two that the three men had already brought.
She was doubling down.
Oh, God, yeah. So they go out
confidence of this woman.
Oh, God, I know. The
Yeah.
fucking gall and nerve.
Now, Blake, I know that you and I talked about this particular part of the story before, and I had heard several documentaries and things like that had said something to the effect of how she had told them just don't mess up her rose bushes, and you said you really couldn't find that particularly documented anywhere. That's kind of like a hearsay part of the story, but she didn't want them to mess up her rose bushes.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything that actually documented that, but it was something that I have heard before. That go ahead, dig. Just don't mess up my rose bushes.
Just don't mess up my rose bushes.
Well, they go to the backyard and they start to dig. And Dorothea stood watch from her second-story balcony. And the first series of holes they dug only really dislodged soft dirt, and the act seemed futile in the moment. And he said, Detective Cabrera says, quote, "At one point, I started finding pieces of garbage, eggshell paper, cigarette butts. As I was digging, I looked up. I saw Dorothea standing out on the balcony on the second floor, and she's just staring at me. Well, as he continued to dig, he started to find pieces of cloth. He pulled each piece out, a kind of light pinkish color, set into a little pile on the side. And he said he also began to find what looked like pieces of leather that some type resembled like beef jerky a little bit. And he continued to dig, and suddenly his shovel hit something dull with a hard with a dull thud. And they started to scoop away dirt and came across what they believed to be a tree root. He said he attempted to remove the root with his shovel, but it wouldn't budge. So he climbs into the hole, he braces himself against, he grabs hold of this tree root, and he yanks, and it finally breaks loose. But he says something seemed odd, because on the end of this root was a ball, and it hit him, and shock set in. Because what he had actually dislodged, in fact, was a human femur.
Jesus Christ.
And suddenly the picture became crystal clear. Now, the remaining part of the leg bone was still attached to other body parts, a badly decomposed foot inside a dark dress shoe. The leathery beef jerky, that was petrified human flesh that had fallen off the bone.
Oh my God.
And the shovel lent to them by Dorothea was the one to discover the macabre scene.
Wow.
Well, some reports say that he summoned her to the backyard and she basically gasped at the sight and, bracketing her cheeks and said, "I don't know what to tell you."
She said, "Fiesta, I meant he took a siesta permanently in my backyard."
Jesus Christ. How to get canceled in 30 seconds, guys. Anyways. Well, Detective Cabrera now, he's retired. He'd be about 72 years old now. And he's worked on cases such as the mass murderer Morris Solomon, as well as the Unabomber. And he has actually said that Dorothea lodged into his psyche as the rarest predator he's ever confronted and said, quote, "A person like her, there's absolutely no forgetting." Now, I know what you're thinking. We have a human leg in her yard. However, turning up a human leg in the backyard forces Detective Cabrera to weigh three factors.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, old bones sometimes turned up in downtown and midtown yards, which were vestiges to the early 20th century when families were unable to afford a cemetery plot to inter their loved ones on the property. So that's number one. Number two, the advanced state of decay suggested that this person had died long before Bert's presumed disappearance back in August, only a short, 2-3 months ago.
Mm.
And number three, there was the riddle of Dorothea herself. Slight and demure, with ivory white hair and a solicitous demeanor, the landlady resembled any other elderly woman with a kitchen full of pots and pans and a cat calendar hanging next to the stove. Yes, she had breached her federal probation by running a boarding house, yet she admitted to that offense whenever she was asked. Her past crimes belied her pose of pure benevolence, yet she submitted to the house and yard searches without protest. So there's kind of this.
So it makes you question if she's so willing to help us, she's got to think there's nothing back there. Why would you be so stupid as to say, yes, go ahead and dig if you knew they were going to find something?
I mean, it's the same thing, though. Think about Bundy. Like, Bundy helped, not Bundy, I'm sorry, Gacy. Gacy helped the cops out whenever they were looking for people in his crawl space. He was like, "Oh, yeah, come on in. I'll make you a drink." And then, his hubris trying to help the cops out is what ended up doing him in as well. So these people just think that they are above the law. They think they're never going to get caught. They think they're invincible. And, it's usually that's what ends up doing them in.
I think she had probably relied on her appearance, which was a grandmother. Nobody would think that this grandmother would do that. And would they really search if she said yes? Because yes, I violated my parole, but it's because I want to help people.
Mm-hmm.
It's just in my nature.
It's
I'm a good, helpful person.
Yeah,
they're trying to make themselves look better and look better in front of law enforcement and trying to fool people, but they're so obvious. It's hilarious.
Well, regardless, she's taken down to the police station. She's grilled for 2 hours straight. And when she's confronted about this scene, she remains emotionless. She never flinched. She never broke a sweat or eye contact. And she denied everything by ending it and saying, quote, "When you find out how old it is and see that I didn't have anything to do with it." And that's pretty much where interview kind of ends for it. And she remained defiant that Bert's disappearance had nothing to do with her, despite these rumors that Detective Cabrera alleged had heard that Dorothea had bodies in her yard. So she said she had buried garbage, which he corroborated by pulling out eggshells and cigarette butts, and all that kind of shit. But again, without sufficient evidence to arrest her, Detective Cabrera had no other choice but to let Dorothea go back home. However, a patrolman was going with her, and he's going to stay outside the whole night, and so he did.
I don't understand how finding a body in her backyard with all these accusations is not sufficient evidence. At least to hold her.
You got to remember, they're only there for Bert. That's it.
Yeah.
They're only there for Bert. You're finding a body that's more heavily decomposed than Bert's disappearance.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, by law, that's not what they were there for. And knowing what I just laid out, that people used to bury their people on their property. They don't have anything to go off to prove that she's the one that put this body there or did anything. So they have to let her go back home. There's not enough evidence to keep her there because they're there for Bert.
Yeah. If they collect any evidence that isn't directly related to Bert, it gets thrown out in court.
Yeah,
sure.
So you have to stop. And here's the problem. They didn't stop digging when they found it. They should have stopped, made a phone call to a judge and said, "Hey, we just found a body. We want permission to search for any and everything that might be human remains."
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't. They continued to dig.
Mm-hmm.
So they basically, fruit of the poisonous tree, they were collecting evidence illegally at that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, the following day, forensic experts and police, they descended on Dorothea's home. And she again watched from her porch. But before Spade could be put into dirt, she pulled Detective Cabrera aside and asked him, she said, "Am I under arrest? Because all of this is making me nervous and I'd like to go to get a cup of coffee over at my nephew's." And he goes, "Well, where's that?" And she says, "Well, it's over at the hotel around the corner." Again, they didn't have anything to hold her on. Bert had only been missing 3 months, and he knew the body that they found was not Bert's. So without anything to keep her on, he was like, "Yeah, I guess, sure." And he escorts her out of the gate. She came out in a red coat, and there's actually a picture of this taking place that is up on the screen right now. She came out in a red coat, and Detective Cabrera escorted her out of the gate along with her tenant, John McCauley, and walked with the two of them halfway to the hotel and stood and waited for Dorothea and John to disappear into the hotel. Detective Cabrera returned to Dorothea's house, and the team started to dig. 21 minutes later, Detective Cabrera says he remembers the time precisely. He got his sufficient evidence because Detective Cabrera struck his shovel into the ground and started lifting. And when the shovel came up, sitting on the spade was a second human leg. He had just found another set of remains on her property. So, of course, he yells, go get her, go grab her. And he continues to dig at this point. And he says that after a few minutes, an officer walked up and very softly and quietly asked, "Where did you say you left her?"
Mm-hmm.
And he said his heart instantly sank, and he thought, "Son of a bitch, she's on the run." And he points to her purse in that photo of him leading her out of the gate. And I'm going to throw it back up on the screen. And he says, "You see how this is bulging? Her purse is bulging." Yeah, he says, quote, "It had about $2,500 to $3,000 in it. Didn't know that at the time."
Wow.
Yeah. So
this woman is dastardly.
Here's the thing. There were so many. I just want a cup of coffee. Well, there was an officer that was supposed to stay with her.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought that patrolman was supposed to.
Yeah, but she's all woman. She needs some coffee. That bitch don't need no caffeine. You stay in your house and make you some Sanka.
True. Well, what it ended up having, well, he basically puts out a bolo for Dorothea, and he's what ends up happening is Dorothea and John walk into the hotel, yes, but they caught a cab from the hotel and went to a West Sacramento bar where instead of coffee, she had a few vodkas and orange juice to calm her nerves, and that's where the pair split. And she took a cab to Stockton, California, where she was dropped off at a bus station, and then she caught a bus to Los Angeles. And Dorothea said that she sat in her Los Angeles motel room number 31 at the Royal Viking Motel for the next 3 days. If you want to know where it's at, I'm not sure if it's still standing or not. Seldom leaving this. And she watches these images flickered up on the screen. The Victorian home on F Street, cops hauling away body bags. While the detectives back at Dorothea's house, they had all that they needed from Dorothea. They had permission to search. And with that, they dug up her entire freaking yard. They ended up digging up an additional 5 bodies. And even one of the bodies they had found, even though it was wrapped in blankets, one of the bodies they had found, police couldn't see the body, but it was huge, almost 200 and something pounds and very tall. And Detective Cabrera said, quote, "It left no doubt in my mind that had to be Bert Montoya." Well, several of these bodies, they were swaddled in bed sheets that ended up matching linens found in Dorothea's home. Some of the bodies were in almost mummified states. One body was missing its head, hands, and feet. And altogether, there were 4 women, 3 men between the ages of 52 and 79, all former tenants of Dorothea. And Detective Cabrera said, quote, "Each time we found one, it was just mind-boggling." He said, you look at it, you go, here's another one, and then here's another one. Oh, and another one. Well, with the consent to search, detectives took to the inside of the house to go over it with a fine-tooth comb. And Detective Cabrera came across the calendar in the kitchen. I find this very interesting. This tells you what kind of woman she is, honestly. Comes across the calendar in the kitchen, and in some of the dates, Dorothea had actually written the words, quote, "Bert left," knowing that he's going to find this calendar. And Detective Cabrera actually says it looked like it looked like he was going to find it and just go, oh, wait a minute. She has it right here on the calendar. Okay, Bert left. Hey, let's wrap it up, man. Let's close it down. He's gone.
She's innocent. There's
Yeah,
the proof.
she's innocent.
Who
And
writes crap on a calendar that isn't true?
And I think it just shows the lengths that she was willing to go to make this so real in this moment.
So she has to have an accomplice, because there's no way that her little self is dragging all those bodies and putting them in the backyard.
Oh, I'm going to wrap that up in a nice little bow for you.
Okay.
Here in a little bit. Now, on the second floor, when they got to the second floor, adjacent to the kitchen, which was the room John Sharp had spoken about, Detective Cabrera was walking around and noticed how cushy the carpet felt. And when he looked down, he noticed it wasn't just one carpet. It was 2 layers of carpet. Well, he reached back and he lifted up both the carpets and immediately was overcome by the stench he'd only smelled a few times. What permeated the floor in this area, he knew all too well. Putrefied body fluids.
Oh, no.
This is exactly the spot where Detective Cabrera believed Dorothea had prepared the bodies for the burial. So this nationwide manhunt ensued for Dorothea, with agencies such as FBI, Secret Service, Marshal's Office all getting involved. It had been feared that she had fled all the way to Mexico, so the search extended that far south as well as coast to coast. So they are looking for her everywhere. I mean, she could have gotten on a plane. They don't know. Well, Dorothea told journalist Martin Hughes for the Sacktown magazine article that as she sat in her hotel room and watched the bulletin of herself, a dark thought creeped in of, I want to kill myself.
Wait, that's her dark thought? I want to kill myself? You should have started with that.
Yeah. Well, he pushed further on that, and he says some might interpret that is a kind of a confession. And Dorothea replies to him, first off, I was getting the checks. I didn't need to kill anyone. Why would I waste all of my time to get these people cleaned up, make sure that they have no diseases, get all their affairs in order if I was going to kill them? And Martin Hughes says, but there were 7 dead bodies in your yard. And she replied, the only time they were in good health was when they stayed in my home. I made them change their clothes every day, take a bath every day, eat 3 meals a day. These were people. The Salvation Army wouldn't even take them. When they came to me, they were so sick they weren't expected to live.
Oh, how great you are.
And he pivoted by saying, a lot of people saw your running away as a sign of guilt. And she said, if I'm thinking about getting away, you think I'm going to ask permission? Kind of answer is that anyways?
Because of the whole, can I go get some coffee?
Yeah. Well, according to her, on day 4 of being on the run, cabin fever begins to set in. So she drops by this local dive bar near the motel and introduces herself as Donna Johansson to a retired carpenter named Charles Wilgeis. Now, Charles was attracted as well as standoffish from the stranger, who came off a little too hard with her questions about his Social Security checks and the abrupt suggestion they should move in together. Yeah. When he said she also looked familiar too.
Trying to keep a low profile there, eh?
Yeah, no shit.
Right.
Well, at the end I like you. How much are you making? Can I live with you?
Bitch, get the fuck away from me.
Yes.
I don't know you.
Well, at the end of the conversation, they made a date to go shopping the next day, but before that they could, Charles pieced together the puzzle from the popular news stories going on. And later that night, Charles phoned in a tip to the police. And with Charles' tip, police quickly surrounded her room at the Royal Viking Motel, and Dorothea surrendered quietly. Now, coincidentally, this is the fun part, to get her back home, they put her on a plane that's chartered by KCRA for its news crew. Like, hey, you just got arrested. We're going to put you on the news crew airplane.
Well, you know what? Who wouldn't have agreed to that? Because now they have the exclusive. They have her alone.
However,
oh, hell yeah.
Well, it's the one time that the world gets to hear from her. It's the one, if I'm not mistaken, only time other than the Sacktown magazine article that the world actually gets to hear her publicly speaking. And she says on camera, quote, I have not killed anyone. The checks I cashed, yes, I used to be a very good person at one time.
Speaking of herself in past tense, you know how I like to look at semantics.
Oh, yeah.
And the way that people say things.
Yeah.
It's very telling of their true motivations.
Well, Detective Cabrera, he's at home and he sees that she's been captured and he's like, shit, I got to go. So he goes and he makes sure he meets up with the unmarked police car. You know, she's sitting in the back, all this stuff. And all the way back to Sacramento, Detective Cabrera, he sits next to her. And as he said, it was the weirdest ride ever, you know. I mean, nothing was really ever said. It was just very
Mine was pretty tense.
Yeah, pretty tense, but also at the same time very quiet. Well, when it hits national news, Detective Cabrera received a phone call from the family of Everson Gilmeth. They stated that he was engaged to Dorothea and that they hadn't heard from him in quite a while. And with all the bodies, they were nervous and anxious. And it was a short time later that detectives from Sutter County, just above Sacramento, contacted Detective Cabrera and told him about the John Doe they had from back in 1986. Now, John Doe was similar to the type of bodies found in the yard, wrapped in plastic and in duct tape. And this is when Everson Gilmeth's remains were actually identified. It appeared that Dorothea had allegedly killed him within 3 to 4 weeks of him moving into her home before Dorothea disposed of him in the horrific fashion of dumping him into the river. And it was at this time that yet another family, Bill Clausen and his sister, approached now District Attorney John Amara. And after the new DA looked at the similarities, there was enough there to bring that into the fold and finally charge Dorothea with Ruth Monroe's murder. So she is arrested. And prosecutor charged her with killing 9 people.
Damn.
Ruth Monroe, Everson Gilmeth, and 7 tenants. 52-year-old Alvaro Bert Gonzalez Montoya, 55-year-old Benjamin Fink, 62-year-old James Gallup, 64-year-old Dorothy Miller, 64-year-old Vera Faye Martin, and 78-year-old Betty Palmer, and 78-year-old Leona Carpenter, Leona being the first of the bodies to be found. And police speculate that it was Bert who may have been unwittingly recruited to carry the rat bodies out of the house.
Oh, fuck.
And once Bert had learned the truth, he had paid with his life. Well, with this, Dorothea was set to stand trial, which honestly wasn't going to be an easy one, despite the enormous circumstantial, at this point, evidence against her, circumstantial. Dorothea was to undergo an evaluation by a forensic psychologist, William Vickery. And even Vickery said at their first meeting, quote, "I was struck at how pleasant and socially intact and intelligent she was. She did not strike me as a person who had a major illness. I was bewildered as to what in the world was going on with all these people in her yard." Now, procedural wrangling moved the trial from Monterey after a judge said Dorothea wouldn't be able to find a fair trial with the media storm in the area. And with 9 charges of murder, Dorothea Puente could have faced the death penalty at this point. I'm sorry, I have to call.
That's okay, because in California at that point, I believe that the death penalty, let's see, Manson got off on a technicality because the death penalty was repealed. And it was reinstated sometime in the 80s, was it not?
Yes. Don't get me lying.
Then it got pulled back out again, like at the end of the 80s as being unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional.
Okay.
Yep.
So this time frame is when, at that time, the death penalty was not an active option in California. Correct?
I believe so. Don't get me lying. I know that different
not
states
like in
handled
Texas.
it differently.
We're like, bring her ass here. We know what to do with her.
Yeah. Well, prior to the jury selection, she rejects a plea deal that would have spared her the death penalty if she pled guilty to all 9 murders. Now, it was a complex case that stood on very shifting sands of circumstantial evidence, is what I gathered from a lot of the readings. Forensic testing had failed to determine a definitive cause of death for any of the victims. For the 7 tenants, there was a variety of drugs in their bodies, which included anticonvulsants, antidepressants, antipsychotics, painkillers, tranquilizers. And according to the court records, the only drug in all the victims was a sedative called Dalmane that came in a blue capsule form, which is what was found in her house. And between October 1985 and November 1988, Dorothea had refilled this more than 3 dozen times with 30 pills each. Well, she purchased these through the doctors who were oblivious to her past criminal behavior, and they believed her stories that she just wanted to help her boarder sleep.
Was she doc shopping? Didn't she have like 2 or 3 doctors that had prescribed
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
Yes, she was. Yeah.
And that's before the hospital and doctor records were all put on.
Figure all that out.
Much more difficult to do that now.
Yeah. Well, basically, to kind of sum up obviously the blend of drugs could have been lethal, yes. But it could also become the victims to become very weakened to where they couldn't have fought off like suffocation by a pillow or something, which that in itself is almost untraceable as a cause of death.
Yeah.
Well, the months passed before the trial reduced the toxicology or before the trial, and that reduced the toxicology results down to educated guesswork at that point. So there wasn't any way to rule out that the victims hadn't taken the drugs themselves, considering their addiction and mental health issues. So that's why it's very circumstantial. On top of that, district attorney even bigger hill to climb because he's trying to cultivate compassion for individuals at this time that many people refer to as shadow people. That
they were
people
considered disposable. They were throwaway people because nobody was looking for them, and they had either a mental health issue or a drug problem or something like that.
Well, and at the same time, he's also trying to build this case with witnesses of the same ilk, if you will.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Real quick question. And I know that at the states of decomposition that a lot of the bodies were found in, you had said something about and again, I know part of the story, but the whole thing about how they were possibly suffocated with a pillow.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recall in this story if the eyes of the victims were they able to see any particular hemorrhaging, or had they already decomposed?
I wasn't able to read anything over anything of what could have been a cause of death. Like, they literally had no idea what a definitive cause of death could have been.
Okay, because suffocation, strangulation, that's going to leave petechial hemorrhaging, those popped blood vessels in your eyes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so, but if the eyes had decomposed to a point where you couldn't tell, yeah. And again, the forensics aren't there today, so. Yeah.
Well, so the thing is, she didn't have a confession. Number 2, she admitted to cashing the checks after they had died in their sleep. She said they were sick. She didn't kill them. She buried them because she couldn't call the authorities. Why? Because she was on parole and would have been found in violation of said parole. And even Detective Cabrera said that this made sense to him of why, her response to why she did what she did. So go ahead, Ryan.
But she is very calculated. Like, her history shows she is a cold and calculated woman. Yes, and she has an excuse for everything. She's got a backup plan on a backup plan on a backup plan. This lady is very slippery. Like, I wouldn't.
Yeah, but see, your Detective Cabrera does not know her whole story. Mm-hmm. You know it right now, but he doesn't know the entire story yet.
Yeah, you're right.
No. So trial starts, trial goes on, all this stuff, and it drags on for 5 months, in which 150 witnesses were called and thousands of pieces of evidence were brought forward as Dorothea faced unrelenting media scrutiny. And still, she sat stoic and frozen the whole time through. The persecution called her one of the most, quote, cold and calculating female killers the country had ever seen.
Yep.
And presented the argument that Dorothea had used sleeping pills to drug her tenants, suffocated them, and then hired convicts to bury them in the yard. And defense attorney Kevin Climo concluded this in his closing argument by showing a picture commonly used in psychology that can be viewed in different ways, saying, keep in mind, things are not always what they seem. That's what her defense attorney said. Well, jury deliberation commenced on July 1993, but it soon stalled in what was the longest jury deliberation in California history. 24 days. 11 jurors were convinced of Dorothea's guilt in killing the 7 boarders, but 1 juror disagreed. And in my opinion, this is the last to fall to her, to be victim to her grandmotherly facade. She's a psychotic bitch. But anyways, finally, on the 24th day of the deliberation, the holdout juror caved, voting guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder. The lone juror never explained his motive for giving in, nor discussed why he agreed to only convict her on 3 of the killings. So that's when her composure actually cracked at that moment, when the verdict was read. And in his sessions throughout the trial, the psychologist, William Vickery, he got so very close to the subject of guilt, but Dorothea never wavered. He said, quote, her eyes would fill with tears, but she would never admit it. It was too humiliating, too shameful for her to admit responsibility for these crimes. And it was so counter to her strenuous efforts all her life to be somebody who was respected, somebody important. And in the sentencing phase, several witnesses were called, including her long-lost daughter and mental health experts. And I'm going to read y'all. I love these closing arguments. They're kind of short, pretty short. District Attorney O'Mara's closing statement says, does anyone become responsible for their conduct in this world? These people were human beings. They had a right to live. They did not have a lot of possessions, no houses, no cars, only their Social Security checks and their lives. And she took it all. Death is the only appropriate penalty. And her defense attorney, Kevin Climo, his closing argument was, You have heard of the despair, which was the foundation of her life, the anger and resentment. If anyone in the jury room tells you it was not that bad, ask them, would you want that to happen to yourself? Would you want that to happen to your children? I am led to believe if there is any reason for us to be living here on earth, it is somehow to enhance another's humanity, to love, to touch each other with kindness, to know that you have made just one person breathe easier because you have lived. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that this is why these people came to testify for Dorothea Puente. I think you can only truly understand why so many people testified and asked you to spare Dorothea's life only if you have ever fallen down and stumbled on the road of life and had someone pick you up, give you comfort, give you love, show you the way. Then you will understand why these people believe Dorothea's life is worth saving. That is mitigating. That is a human quality that deserves to be preserved. It is a flame of humanity that has burned inside Dorothea since she was young. That is a reason to give Dorothea Puente life without possibility of parole.
Okay.
Well, Dorothea
Yeah.
Dorothea was convicted on 3 of the murders, and the jury could not agree on the other 6. And after several days of deliberation in the sentencing phase, the jury was deadlocked 7-5. And the judge declared a mistrial for that portion. And after the jury said that further days of deliberation would not change their minds of, life or death, or
Yeah,
life
they were
without parole.
hopelessly deadlocked.
Yeah, they were hopelessly deadlocked on the sentencing portion. Well, under the law, Dorothea received life without possibility of parole. And she was incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. And she proclaimed her innocence, insisting that all her boarders died of natural causes. And what kills me in this story, and I hate even reporting it, but you don't get the full story without it. Dorothea Puente was acquitted in the poisoning death of Bill Clausen's mother, Ruth Monroe, and Dorothea's business partner. Bill, who testified in the trial, regards Dorothea's ever-living day as a denigration to his mother's memory, stating, quote, "She's not hurting there in prison. She's got everything she needs. Her life is taken care of. It's sick." Going further, he says, quote, "If by some unimaginable spasm of fate she could ever walk free, I'll be waiting for her."
Some good old frontier justice.
Well, the fact is in this case, Dorothea was killing people just 4 blocks away from the Capitol building in Sacramento, on Main Street of the capital of California. I'm not sure if there's ever really been another serial killer that has been either that audacious or gotten away with that kind of crime right there on the front door of the Capitol building. And in all, Dorothea Puente gained a monthly income of $5,000 from her crimes and $100,000 overall, which she then donated to political campaigns, fundraisers, charitable organizations to gain status within the community. Even the clothes she was donating came directly from her victims. Well, her appeals run out in 2008, just before the Martin Q's Sacktown magazine article, before he got to sit down with her for her final interview for the 20th anniversary of her crimes. Now, at the commencement of the interview, almost immediately, she sits down and she says, quote, "I'm not guilty. They don't have all the facts. They never talk to me. I don't think anyone would pick this kind of life. But God always puts obstacles in people's way. Look at Job, John, Paul, and Moses. Things happen for a reason."
Suddenly she freaking Moses?
Yeah.
I think the F not.
I hate this woman. Well, she then so easily skips to her daily routine and her medical history. She had a tumor removed from behind her knee in 2008, angioplasty in 2003, repair of a ruptured artery in 1998, and undergo cancer surgery in 1961. Blah, blah, blah. Fuck this bitch. Of course, there's no records of any of that shit. We're probably not going to find them too because they're medical records. But anyways, when asked if she ever hears from her surviving siblings or her 2 daughters, Dorothea replies, quote, "As far as they're concerned, I'm dead." And with decades to think about her situation, Martin Hughes says that Dorothea sounds as unpersuasive now as she did during her plane ride from Los Angeles. Well, Martin Hughes writes, quote, "Explaining away the corpses in her yard, she says, not one person who worked for me saw me doing anything wrong. People were always coming and going. Alcoholics don't stay in one place for long. How did I know where they were?" She then points the finger at Macaulay, the guy that left her house with her to go to the hotel. And another tenant, but they were both cleared early on and had both since died. So Dorothea says, quote, "I think they needed somebody, and I was the easiest one around." And Martin Hughes says, quote, her silence about her dead boarders is very illuminating. For someone who insists she worried over the well-being of her tenants, Puente tells me that after her arrest, she fretted about Sam, saying that was my tomcat. I didn't know if anyone was going to be able to look after him. And in her final interview with Martin Hughes, he pushes even harder. And he says, do you ever wish you had received the death penalty? She replies, maybe I would have been better off. It's the same thing. I'm here until I die. And he says, what do you want when death comes? And she says, that I can die peacefully in my sleep without being sick or being a cripple. I don't want to be a burden on anyone. And his final question to her in this interview was, what's it like to be known as a murderer? He said she turned to him. They held each other's stare. And he waited for her to speak. And all she said was, I don't give a shit what anyone else thinks. And Dorothea Puente died in prison in Chowchilla at the age of 82 on March 27th, 2011 from natural causes. This bitch. I hate this bitch.
She's an awful, awful person.
Oh, we have one of our viewers who was living in the suburb of Sacramento when this story broke.
Oh, really?
Ah, really?
That's Alyssa.
Did they ever encounter her?
I don't know.
I don't know. Say whoever you are. I don't know who you are.
All I can tell you is that I have. This is one that I was young, but I do remember watching this coverage on the news, and just I could not figure out, because you're right. She had a lot of people fooled. She looked like somebody's grandma.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if you had a good grandma growing up, you couldn't imagine grandma doing something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And just this whole idea, and I vaguely remember, I've watched documentaries about it since then, but I vaguely remember her whole thing about being on the run, and just the fact that she walked away because she wanted some coffee. That is something that just never, even the most dumb of detectives or police officers, I don't think they just let a suspect walk right. Can I go get some coffee? Yeah, I'll be right back. I'm going to this hotel. Lots of entrances and exits, but you wait right here.
The only thing that I can figure for the momentary lapse in judgment from the detective is he's digging up dead bodies and he's just thinking about what he's going to find next. And so,
but he had a team there do that.
True, I'm saying, but I think that might be because he was leading everything and she went right up to him. I think that he just had a momentary lapse in reason, and he just was like, well, I can't hold her here, so I guess I have to let her go where she wants to go. So, I mean, even though it was dumb, I would have put somebody on her like that.
Exactly.
I would have had somebody watching her.
But that's the thing is, like, during that time, I mean, you're right. He was having to dig up all these bodies and deal with all that mentally and all this stuff. And she's like, yo, I just want a cup of Joe. And he was like, okay, I don't have anything to hold her here. She's this grandmotherly type. This body is not the body that we're looking for.
Yeah, what you gonna do? Take off running? I can catch
her. Not knowing that she's really 10 to 15 years younger than she actually is. So it's like this weird conundrum that he's in, because at the same time, he doesn't have enough to hold her there, because that's not why he's there. This body that they found is not why he's there. Mm-hmm. It could be from back when people buried people, their loved ones on their property. So I think it just became kind of overwhelmed with the situation. It was like, sure, go get it,
Yeah.
Yeah, but he was a cop in a major metropolitan area. Just the fact that he's finding bodies and he's questioning, he's had to, unearth a body before being a cop in a major area. He's seen murders. Yeah. And that to me is that momentary lapse in judgment that I don't understand. That he just lets her go get some coffee. Again, go back in the house and make you some Sanka.
Well, see, here's my thing. Okay. Go ahead, Ryan.
Question. At this point, whenever that picture is taken where she's walking out of the gate, the media had been alerted at this point, correct?
Oh, yes.
Oh, the media is aware.
Yes. So, okay, you have a media circus going on outside. You have, like, your superiors you got to answer to. You're digging up bodies. You have all this stuff going on. Like I said, I mean, he's getting pulled 5 different ways. We've all been in a situation where we're getting pulled 5 different ways and someone says, hey, can I, yeah, sure, whatever. You know, and I think maybe that's kind of what happened to him. Yeah, he's a trained professional, and yeah, he's dealt with dead bodies before, but maybe not so much media coverage at the time. He's probably getting asked umpteen different questions by reporters and anybody looking to get the scoop on the story. And he's, like I said, he's dealing with his superiors, he's dealing with his workers who are trying to dig up this body, and then he just was like, whatever, you go ahead and go and do what you want to do.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what happened.
I think what it is, though, is I think, not to say that that's not like a what the fuck moment, but I think that we're honing in on the wrong side of this story. My opinion on all of this falls on the police work and the city work prior to any of these fucking people even living with her. Because it says in there that John Cabrera was like, all of a sudden, oh, I should look into who she is, and relatively quickly figured out she's on federal parole. And that running a boarding house is against her federal parole. Had anybody even slightly done a little bit of fucking homework on this woman, there might have actually been a hell of a lot less bodies, if any at all, that would have been dug up in her yard. And on top of that, I think that there also, even back then, that there was a prejudice and a discriminatory way of being towards people who are on the fringes of society, if you will, those that are considered addicts and homeless and mentally ill and all of that kind of stuff. That was more rampant way back then than it is now. Obviously, I'm not saying that it's not happening still, but I think that's the part that needs to be focused on is this whole thing was fucked up from the beginning. She never should have been able to have one single freaking tenant in her house.
How many crimes, though, have we covered? And how many crimes do you know of? If somebody had just done their fucking job, none of it would have ever happened. If somebody would have just...
How many true crime episodes have we done on this podcast? No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, if somebody would have just logged into a computer system or looked at a file, everything would have been fine. Or made a phone call. But so many people were just like, no, not my job. I'm going to slough it off to someone else. And then it just keeps getting pushed down the line until no one just nobody does it. And then people's lives are at stake.
Well, and all this is going on, too, during what is, you know, rather unsettlingly termed the golden age of the serial killer, because from about 72 to about 92, that 20-year span, this is when your big time Bundy, Gacy, your bad baddies are operating, and they all looked a certain way. And here she was the anomaly, this little sweet grandma. So I'm willing to forgive Cabrera just a little bit that, you know, oh God, she doesn't look like one of these weirdos we've been grabbing a hold of. That had been her strength all along. She appeared trustworthy.
I don't hold anything against Cabrera himself. He comes into the picture whenever Bert is missing.
I'm forgiving his misstep of letting her go and get coffee unattended. That's what I'm saying. I can forgive him.
Yeah, I mean, okay, it was a what the fuck moment whenever she went on the run. Yeah, I totally get that. But and I know I'm catching a tiny bit of heat about systems being in place back in the day, and I understand that there weren't systems that we have today. I get that, but people still had phones. Records. People still had things. She had been in the area for so long at this point. Whenever this boarding house. If they would have had just a little bit of research done at whatever, looking into her, running these names back, Dorothea McFall, Johansson, whatever, if they could have tied it anyway, it just seems like there was no extra step taken to make sure that this woman was clear to run a boarding house. And in turn, she had the ability to kill 9 people in total.
I think, let me clarify something. So she was never licensed to run a boarding house, just to be clear. But I think what you're saying is that these people, the social workers who were sending people to live with her, had they done a cursory check of her, they would have known she was not licensed to run a boarding house.
Well, the social workers, her federal parole officer, where's he at? She's on federal parole at this point.
That's been. They're my guests. They're just visiting.
Didn't do his homework. Didn't do his homework.
Do we know if he was on the take? Do you think that could have been a thing too?
No, I don't think so, because he showed up whenever she came forward and was like, I'm in violation of my parole.
Right,
she was not a direct bribe kind of person. She would be like, hey, really need to have this sign fixed over here. And how about if I make a donation to your campaign? And then if your campaign can do this, I would really like a stop sign, right? She was that, I don't think she was a direct bribe. Here's $50. Make sure this happens. She was a donator. She was basically a grandma kind of lobbyist for the things she wanted.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And I think that it was one of those things that she starts out one way, like she, you know, she goes to Olympia, Washington whenever she's 16 and starts up with prostitution. And she starts going down, you know, that path. Don't come for me in the comments. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with sex work. More power to sex workers. I support you. However, back then, we know that there was some shady shit going on whenever you were a sex worker.
Yeah.
And I think that lifestyle that she was leading back then, when it was what it was, started to lead her down a very opportunistic lifestyle. And I think that that's when she started seeing, oh, I can do this and just make this much money. And then from there, she wanted more and more and more and more and more. And she knew that, oh, if I just get rid of them, the checks still come and I don't have to give them shit. And so I think she just started out as this opportunistic criminal, if you will, that just kept ratcheting shit up when she finally realized, oh, it's still going to come even if they're not living.
as long as they don't know.
As long as they don't know they're dead. Yep.
Well, I, for one,
to my knowledge, nobody ever knew, none of the government checks ever knew that any of those tenants were dead.
No,
until, of course,
people
it
that
broke.
no one checked on.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I,
Go
for
ahead,
one,
Ryan.
too, think that she is a cold and calculating snake who preyed upon the people in society that no one would look for.
Yeah.
She preyed upon the elderly, the poor, the sick, the homeless. And she knew everything. She planned everything that she did. And she was just cold and calculating. And I think it was in her nature to be so.
And I'm gonna say, I'm gonna go along with you there, but you got to remember, because she did do a brief amount of time in prison, you know, and most people will tell you that if you go to prison, you don't necessarily come out better, you just become a better criminal.
It's like going to criminal university.
And yes, you might choose not to do those things whenever you get out, but you certainly have gained knowledge you may or may not have had whenever you went in. So suddenly your opportunities where you were thinking in this, you know, along this frame, now you're thinking in this frame. You get a wider scope. Again, like you said, like a university, you're getting an education. And perhaps she learned some of her tricks while she was in jail the first time.
See, and I think it was completely nurture. Because of her upbringing and the way that what she had to deal with. By the time she's 10, she's orphaned. Her mother was abusive and abandoning her. Her father was an alcoholic, threatened to take his own life. All of that is going to be very traumatic for a child. And I think that having that kind of, I guess you could say, PTSD from your childhood, couple it with the life that you start to walk down at the age of 16 into the world of sex work, and then you become this opportunistic criminal who decides to just keep ratcheting things up a notch because she has a criminal background, but it takes her such a long time to get to the point of actually committing the first murder. When we see a lot of these other people that we talk about, Eileen Wuornos, you know, and stuff like that, that they start off relatively quick, like hurting people, you know, like bashing skulls and getting in fist fights and stuff like that. I'm going to have to go with nurture on this one. In my opinion, I think it was a combination of what, like a PTSD. Could she have had something mental in there? Yeah, but I don't think it was to the degree of she starts out as like thinking serial killer think. I think that she had to learn how to adapt to situations to care for herself so that she ends up becoming this opportunistic killer, so to speak, and in turn, an opportunistic serial killer.
And again, I'm going to disagree with you because here's the thing. She was so calculated. She was so careful. She planned so well. And the fact is that she put on the mask that she wanted you to see at every opportunity, including pretending to be older and changing her hair color and suddenly becoming matronly when she wasn't the age that she said she was. She wore a mask, and that mask changed depending on what role she played. I think this was every bit nature. It was her, you know. It's everything. She was a performer, and she played every role pretty well, no matter which one she took on.
And see, to me, that just shouts opportunistic, because you can become a learned person in how to have a craft of how to make it better. I
could probably, from all the murder channel I watch, could probably tell you how to dispose of a body and get away with it, but that's not in my nature. I'm not doing that.
Right. So it's
And I
nurture.
wasn't
That's what
taught
I'm
to do
saying.
that.
It's like she teaches
And I wasn't
herself
taught
this.
to do that.
But that's what I'm saying. Is she teaches herself. Shit, Ryan, get your popcorn.
I
She
need
teaches
popcorn this time. Yeah.
she teaches herself that throughout the time. I don't think this is a nature case so much as it is a nurture, and what she's brought up with and how she has to adapt herself to be able to take care of herself. And then therefore, in being an opportunistic criminal, turns it into being an even heavier opportunistic serial killer to take these benefit checks from them to reap the rewards from it. Because you also got to think, she did not just kill these people for no damn reason. She didn't keep the money. She piddled it away to political campaigns and charitable organizations. What is that? Nothing but opportunity. She wanted an air of legitimacy around her so she could reach the elite social statuses.
And where is the best place to hide? In plain sight. You put yourself front and center. Look at all the donations I make. Look at this.
It's a great opportunity.
Me, because you see, this again is the performance I'm putting on for you. Because again, if you are not a violent person and never wanted to be a violent person, no matter what your upbringing is, if violence is never in your nature, it is not something that you would do.
You're going
to have a hard time convincing me that unless it's this one single moment of where you just snap,
but that's what I'm saying.
Violence is already there. It's there.
But that's what I'm saying is like, okay, yes. Okay. To me, it is this nurture aspect of it, because the way she's brought up, if she is being abandoned, abused, and threatened that her father is going to take his own life in front of her, and an alcoholic, you can guarantee that there is violence in the home. That is a learned, nurtured characteristic. She carries that with her into later life to become this opportunistic criminal, then killer, then serial killer, to gain even more opportunity in the community, to have these write-ups in the newspaper, to gain fame, to gain legitimacy, to gain social status, and get into the elite circles. I mean, she did all of this for $5,000 a month and $100,000 total. And she piddles it all away to campaign and fundraising and charitable organizations. I think that this is a straight up nurture case. I think that she became a learned woman in how to hone her craft to continue to get away with more and more and more and more, knowing what she could say, knowing how to look, so that she could grab more and more opportunity to get these benefit checks in and make even more money.
So, Blake, are you an honest person?
Depends on what the subject is. 99% of the time, yes, I am.
So it's in your nature to be honest.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Damn.
How does that prove anything? What is that's not a fucking mic drop. That's not a fucking mic drop. No, ma'am. That's not a mic drop. That's not a fucking mic drop, because I could turn right the fuck around and say between the ages of blah up to 8 and 10, she watched her father deceive her mother, lie to her mother cheat on her father, whatever I could say. And that's a learned and nurtured behavior.
If you're an honest person, you're an honest person.
I understand that. But that's also how I was raised. I was raised in an honest household. My grandparents that raised me were very honest. So I learned that was nurtured within me to be an honest person, to be a good member of society.
And there are plenty of people that grow up with horrible parents that don't do that because they are honest, good people.
And in those people, I would say that's a straight nature case. But we're talking about Dorothea Puente.
I think that she was that salmon just swimming right back up the stream from whence she was spawned. That is in her nature. She was destined to go down that path. That is nature, baby.
So we're just going to agree to disagree on this one.
Children, please.
Shut up, Daddy. We're playing.
Yeah, you be quiet, Daddy. We're not done playing in the sandbox. No, I'm just kidding. I'm gonna take my toys and go somewhere else.
So Ryan, since we've argued, do you have a final thought?
I think I'm gonna side with Shelley on this one.
Easy, Ethel, you're fine.
I'm a side with Shelley on this one. I think it's nurture. I think that she had.
No, that's
that
siding
instinct.
with me. That's siding with me if you say nurture. You saying nature.
Sorry, yeah, nature. Sorry, I think she had that instinct within her, and I think that the opportunities that presented themselves, she used that instinct to navigate. And I think that she ramped up her killing. She ramped up to killing, and she had that. And she had that cold, calculating, snake-like behavior in her the whole entire time, and used that to her advantage in order to kill those people and take their money. So I think
you can't be cold and calculating without learning it somehow. We'll leave you with that.
I don't know.
You're both right at the same time.
That's fine. It might be lonely on this branch, but I can survive.
Yeah, I hope
Blake,
that shit don't break on you. So, Blake, why don't you tell them everything they need to know?
Hold on. Blake, I have agreed with you. 9 out of 10 times. This is the one time I'm going to side with Shelley on this one. I'm sorry.
Whatever, guys. I'm done. No, I'm just kidding. That's cool. We don't give a shit. We like to debate on this show,
Yeah,
not argue. There's no hurt feelings when we walk away.
Yeah.
We like to give you a good debate. And honestly, Shelley, I'll give it to you. You made some really good points, but I think I made some pretty damn good points too myself.
But
so
not good enough.
Oh, yeah, whatever. Anyways.
Nature gang representing.
Now that's in my nature to be an asshole.
Yeah, you wait till we get on the
so
post broadcast and I get Brittany on the screen. And I bet Brittany will agree with me, maybe, hopefully. Brittany, your spot as producer hinges on your answer. I'm just kidding. It does not. It does not.
It's always the best policy. Right,
it does
Blake?
not. Yes, it is. Anyways. Well, let me tell y'all everything that y'all need to know, like Shelley said real quick. So we got just a couple of announcements. We have not gotten any new public investigation tickets up and to be ready to be sell. Those are going to be going out in the next couple of weeks. So make sure that you head over to Eventbrite, follow our Eventbrite page so you can be notified as soon as those go on sale and you can grab them first because they are starting to sell out extremely quick. On top of that, if you want to catch us at a speaking event, our next speaking event is going to be July the 14th through the 16th. You can catch us in Kansas City, Missouri, speaking at Metacon. They're going to have a wonderful lineup of speakers, including us, as well as 30,000 square feet of shopping, fun, and healing. So make sure and come out and check that out. It's going to be a blast. It's a 3-day Paragon. We're going to have so much fun.
Come watch us argue in person.
Yeah, right? Come watch us argue. It's a lot of fun. So
this is fun.
And also on top of that, as we've been announcing the last couple of weeks, we are trying to help our friends at Broadhead Manor and the Old Park Hotel in Ballinger, Texas, Dan and Connie LaFave with Old Park and hashtag Sir Sexy Bill Walter with Broadhead Manor. We have got their GoFundMe set up in the footer section of our audio episodes. So you can go find those and you can click on those and donate $1, $5, $10. They're just trying to restore these locations back to what they were so that we can continue to enjoy them and that they can continue to host Paracons and charity events. So make sure you check those out as well and give anything that you can. Make sure you're following us across all of our social media channels to stay up to date on all the content we have coming. We got some great things coming later out this year. And they're going to be exclusive to certain channels. So you can find the Linktree link in the description of the episodes or in the About Me or Bio sections and be taken directly where you want to go, including that public event page like I was telling you about, and our Patreon page, which for just $5 a month, you can instantly unlock, I know it's over 100 additional Patreon exclusive videos. You can see us doing what we just did tonight, but we get a little more down and dirty. So those are going to be our pre. Those are our pre. Yep. Those are our pre and post broadcasts. It also is going to include some of our Paracon speaking events. You'll have first dib at public ticket events, and you'll have all the up-to-date information on what we're doing, where we'll be, and everything that we say. We reveal everything on Patreon, by the way. So make sure also leave us a review wherever you can. The more you review us, the more that we are pushed out to even more people so that we can, in turn, bring you even more and more and more content. And as always, any questions, comments, or stories you'd like to share, those can be submitted to us at the evppod@gmail.com. That's THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Like, share, and subscribe.
Absolutely. Well, y'all, thank y'all so much for tuning in for another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I am Blake Smith, and as always, my partners in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt, Mr. Ryan Roberts, and as always, we will see you next Tuesday.